As police in Belgium search for the suspects behind this week's terror attacks, let's take a look back at President Obama addressing the UN General Assembly in 2014.
Islam teaches peace. Muslims the world over aspire to live with dignity and a sense of justice. And when it comes to America and Islam, there is no us and them, there is only us, because millions of Muslim Americans are part of the fabric of our country.
In a recent speech, our next guest said, quote, "Islam is not a religion of peace. There are ways of interpreting Islam that could make it something other than a call to war. But even these benign constructions do not make it a call to peace." The writer of those words, Andy McCarthy, joins us now on the phone. He is a former federal prosecutor and a fellow with the National Review Institute. He's also a member of Ted Cruz's National Security Advisory Team, also the prosecutor who handled the case against the so-called blind sheikh, Abdel Rahman, in New York City, the man convicted of the first bombing of the World Trade Center. Controversial words, Andy, and in some circles they might not be well received. But what do you mean when you say that Islam is not a religion of peace?
Well, I think, John, part of any religion is its doctrine. And, you know, it's not, this isn't like Andy on Islam. This is what Islam says. If you read the Quran, if you read the other sources of Scripture, there's clearly a belligerent construction of Islam built into literal Islamic scripture, and that's the reason that jihadists and Islamists who are aggressively against the West justify their actions in scripture. And it's part of the problem that we have in arguing against that, I think, is twofold. Number one, it's not our job in the West to define what the true Islam is. We should stop doing that because it's just distracting efficient national security policy making. But the other problem we have is that when the jihadists rely on scripture, they're relying on what it literally says. When reformers and others have a contrary interpretation, we can all hope that the contrary interpretation someday becomes the dominant one. But it's a big problem when you know, the aggressive people are relying on the literal words, and the reformers seem like they're dancing on the head of a pin in the way that they interpret them.
And you have practical experience in this area, having, as I mentioned, prosecuted the blind sheikh, the guy who was responsible for the first bombing at the World Trade Center back in 1993. That's what led you to undertake this course of study?
Yeah, well, think about this, John. A guy like the blind sheikh, who we tried to portrayed to the public as somebody who was just a wanton killer and who was at best perverting Islam. Why was he able to have such authority over jihadist circles really throughout the world? With all the maladies he had besides blindness, he was totally incapable of doing anything that would be useful to a terrorist organization. He couldn't build a bomb. He couldn't carry out an attack. The only thing he could do was lead it. And why was that? Because he was a doctor of Islamic jurisprudence, graduated from Al-Azhar University, the seat of Sunni Islamic learning since the 10th century, and he was a globally renowned authority on Sharia, which is Islamic law, and yet somehow we carried on as if the United States government knew more about Islam than he does.
When it comes to the approach in the fight against ISIS, you recently wrote this in the National Review. The administration recently conceded that it has no strategy to deny the Islamic State, which has claimed responsibility for the Brussels attack, their sanctuary in Raqqa, to say nothing of their other strongholds. Let's be clear. If ISIS is orchestrating attacks on the West from Syria and Iraq, that is an American national security challenge, not just a civil war in a faraway place. American national security problems cannot responsibly be delegated to other forces who will carry out our defense and warfighting responsibilities for us. This is our problem. You're suggesting we need to go at ISIS with more military force than we have used to this point.
Yeah, I'm a believer in the doctrine that Bush announced a week after the 9/11 attacks. I think maybe even more than President Bush himself was. But, you know, you can't allow jihadist networks to have safe haven any place on earth if they're using the safe haven as a launch pad for attacks against the United States. And then if the attacks are on our homeland and our interests, that's not something you can delegate to the Kurds to take care of. That's our problem.
Andy McCarthy, love to have you back on again to talk more about it. It's a fascinating perspective. Thank you very much. Thank you.